welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Dez. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I am Dez.
I'm Tammy.
And today we have a special guest with us, Jay, who runs 3R Interactive. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. It's either 3R Interactive or Media. My bad. Jay, tell us who you are, your company name since I can't, and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name's Jay Johns. I'm the founder of a company called 3R Interactive.
Yes.
So yeah, you're pretty close. Yeah, I think you got it. So it's getting harder and harder to describe 3R. Basically, I've been around for 5 years, actually 6 years now, and I started in 2012. And initially, the game plan was to create video games with an educational focus, and through trying to create a lot of contract work to help fund a lot of this stuff, I've then worked on mobile applications and websites and audiobooks, and I've dabbled in podcasts a little bit. And lately I've added user experience to sort of the repertoire of stuff that 3R does to help get money so that way we could create our own video game content. So yeah,
Nice.
I'm no longer kind of like a short and sweet, this is what 3R does. We have like this whole collective of things that we can do to help people. So,
I mean, I feel like that's entrepreneurship, right?
yeah, it totally is. Yeah.
And Jay and I had talked for maybe a few weeks or so before we got this nailed down. And when I was on the website, like we'd had general conversations and everything, but I didn't know your background. And I was on 3R's website and I saw that you have a master's in like UX and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, we're just going to geek out.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about kind of your entry into the tech world and your experience with UI, UX, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So this will sort of be going back 10 years or so, more than 11, I guess. So I guess it goes, I was trying to figure out how deep I wanted to go into it. So back 2005-ish time, I was still living in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. And around that time, a few years into the future from 2005, the whole country kind of goes into recession. But Michigan got hit first because it was part of the automotive collapse, right? So I just sort of looked around after a couple of years, and all of my friends and stuff from high school, we were all just sort of sitting in the same spot. There wasn't really like any advancement at all. And so I was like, I just feel like I have to get out of this state to just grow. And for some reason, Arizona was calling me, and I had no real reason why, but I was just like, I got to go to Arizona. And I was either going to go to culinary school or learn game design. And so when I went and traveled to Arizona and checked out both schools, and I decided to go with game design because I didn't want controlled chaos to be my career, which is what a kitchen is. Funny enough, in game design, there's a lot of that anyway, so I didn't really escape it too much. But
surprise.
Yeah. So in the beginning of 2007, so at the very end of 2006, I moved to Arizona officially and started in January of 2007 for the school. It was a tech school. It's called Collins College, and it no longer exists. Like a few years ago, they shut down. But it was one of those tech schools that went year round. So I went 4 days a week for just over 2.5 years to get a bachelor's degree.
Wow.
So it was pretty intense, but I don't think I would have preferred to do the other way, of where it's broken up into 15-week semesters.
Yeah.
So I was just able to get so much done in such a short amount of time. Pretty quickly so the reason I was even interested in game design, to further answer your question, was prior to that, all the jobs that I pretty much only had for about a year or so, maybe 2 years max, because I would really get excited about learning the next job, like the next job ahead of me. And I would learn everything I could learn where I'm at. And oftentimes when you are just an employee, they're not super excited about letting you just not do what they hired you for just to learn something new, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Stay in your lane.
yeah, exactly. And so I would kind of reach this pinnacle where I would just get bored because I learn everything I can possibly learn at this position. They're giving me maybe a little bit of tidbits about what to do if I were to move up, but never really went anywhere. So I would just find another job. And so and then I made the realization that I just need a creative job.
Mhm.
The ability that every few months it's new problems to solve.
Mhm.
And in game design, it could end up being every couple years there's a new
Mhm.
project that you're working on, but you're constantly solving these minute problems and
Yeah.
very creative. And so I even had that problem today where I was just having a conversation with somebody, and it wasn't. And all of a sudden, I tried solving this problem that didn't even exist about trying to bring art students together in some like
Mm.
art competition. And it's like, why am I even spending my time thinking? It's just that's what I do is I try to do that stuff. So
Mhm.
um, that's what led me, oh, maybe game design is the where I need to be. And at that time, all this free flow of information didn't exist. The only way that you'd be able to learn about game design was if you figured out a way to get hired in as an intern at one of these big companies,
Mhm.
or you went to college for it. Like the idea that you're going to find all this really valid information online wasn't a thing yet. That
Mhm.
really kind of took shape as more independent people started becoming a thing, and then the game engines like the Unity, well, I guess Unreal was sort of the first one that sort of did it, where um, eventually you could get it at a really cheap. It was like a few $100s or something
Mhm.
to initially get some access to it, and then if you made over $100,000, then they would make you give them 5% of your
Hmm.
income.
Mm.
And then that eventually, with when Unity came along, then they both dropped it down to where it's free until you make a certain amount of money, and then you have to pay them some more money. So
Okay.
every step of the way, like nowadays, when I talk to people about game design, the barrier to entry has never been easier. It's
Mhm.
like just start making it. It's
Right.
super simple. So at the time, it wasn't like that, and so I went to school for it, and then um, like 2 months into going to the school, there was a couple there was a legitimate game company that was out there called Rainbow Studios that was under THQ Inc., which no longer exists either. You're going to hear a lot of that through my resume. um, and there was D3 Publisher of America. So um, there was both of the THQ and D3 Publisher had quality assurance jobs that they would offer to a lot of the college students.
Mm.
So I was a game tester. So I applied for that, and I actually got offered the job at both companies. And I was like, what am I like? How do I choose?
It's a good problem to
I
have.
know.
It was a really good problem, especially only being 2 months into the program in general.
Mhm.
And this brings up one of my big keys of advice that someone gave me that I try to pass forward,
Yeah.
which is I was talking with like the career counselor person, and he's like, there's these companies that are, for QA testers.
Mhm.
Are you interested in doing it? I was like, well, I'm interested, but I don't think I have anything worth, I don't have any value yet. I haven't learned anything. And
Mm.
he's like, well, do you want the job? And I was like, yeah. He's like, then apply. It's like, don't wait. If I were to wait till I felt like I was comfortable enough,
Mhm.
right? That then I think it would have been basically when I graduated.
Mhm.
And so like I would have given up like 2 years at least of experience because I would have been too nervous,
Well, and
right?
who's to say, like, after graduation, you would have felt ready even then? Like,
Yeah.
on the podcast, we talk about imposter syndrome
Mm.
all the time and
Yeah.
never
That's
feeling
something
like never feeling
yeah.
like you're, like, ready for whatever it is you're doing. So, that's a really great piece of advice.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that imposter syndrome thing is something that I definitely have felt a lot in my life too. But that's just a great piece of advice is to
Mhm.
just go after something even if you don't feel like you're 100% ready, because if nothing else, they'll teach you how to do it if they
Mhm.
believe in you,
Mm.
right? And it turned out that that's what both companies really liked, was that they just liked the fact that I was motivated and showed interest and I was willing to go out of my way. And so I ended up choosing D3 Publisher of America because their quality assurance house was a lot smaller. There was only, I don't remember exactly, but I'm going to say like 50 to 100 people there, where THQ had maybe 200 or so people
Mhm.
or more. And it felt like I could just learn a lot more at D3. And that ended up being the case because a few years later, they got bought out by Namco Bandai, who already
Hmm.
had a quality assurance testing house in Arizona, or I'm sorry, in California. So our location got shut down, and about 5 or so of us employees got hired in at THQ. So I was able to see both sides of the coin, and luckily I did make the right choice. I mean, I really liked THQ a lot working there. I was really quick to kind of leave too, because like 6 months later, I got offered a job that my previous boss at D3 started his own company called Digital Dreamforge, which still exists. They're now in Tennessee, and they're a quality assurance testing house. And he's like, "Hey, do you want to come back and work for me?" And I jumped at that because THQ, even though it was like this massive company and had a really great culture, they had a really strong non-compete clause. So you couldn't build anything in any of the genres that they were making games. And they were making stuff and everything possible, mobile and consoles and the computer stuff. And they were even creating their own little tablet things for games, like was it UDraw or something like that? So they were in everything. And I didn't feel like, well, how am I going to ever get out of quality assurance if I can't make anything, right? Like I can't get experience. So I started working at D3, and then, or I'm sorry, at Digital Dreamforge. And then, I don't know, 6 months or a year later, we moved back to Fort Wayne because we had our son Drake at that time. And I'm from Michigan. My wife's from here in Fort Wayne. And so we ended up moving here, and there's no game companies in Fort Wayne. so I kind of bounced around a little bit. I worked for the Internet Archive for a little bit. And then I started teaching at ITT Tech, which is another one of those, not really feeling qualified yet to really be able to teach game design. I think I had maybe created a couple small things prior to that, but not enough to where I could be like, "Hey, I'm this person with a lot of credibility. You should listen to me as a student." But I was just like, I'm just going to go for it. And I got the job. So I taught there for the game design program was only going to be 2 years longer. They were phasing out the program nationally. Then I just kept me around for 2 years after that. So I taught for 4 years at ITT Tech. And then I was like, 4 years is long enough. I think that's good. And then I started, but in 2012, so about a year or so after I started teaching, is when I started 3R Interactive, and really kind of pushed on that while I was teaching. And then a few years after I stopped teaching, I decided to go back and get the master's degree, which was in human computer interaction. So that's a lot of user experience and user interface stuff. And that leads us up to today. So yeah,
Nice.
a lot of stuff there, but yeah, it's an interesting backstory for sure. And the reason why I was really interested in getting a master's degree in user experience is because it really tied in well with what I was already doing. Making the things that I'm creating more user friendly is always great, but it also gave me a really great plan B if for whatever reason this particular company doesn't work, right? Because it's pretty well known that companies are, what is it, like 1 in 10 are gonna, or 9 out of 10 are gonna fail or something like that. So in case it will give me a great opportunity to walk into a decently paying job, ideally, if this ever falls away.
A backup plan.
But one of the cool things that I'm finding about it, though, is I'm able to use that as a way to help keep me afloat with 3R, because I can use that and bring in some consulting work. I have a big contract that is due at the end of this month, actually, that's based on the user experience of stuff. So yeah, it's been a wild ride.
When you were teaching and everything, I know you said that one reason why you started 3R was because there weren't companies like that in Fort Wayne. But can you speak to kind of more of that process of shifting from being employed to doing the entrepreneurship, like full entrepreneurship thing, like full time, and kind of how that jump was for you?
Yeah, it actually it took a while for it to be full time, because I was teaching, and even though I was an adjunct teacher, there was semesters in there where I had a full time schedule. So it did take a while for it to be a full time thing. It was negotiation with my wife and stuff too, right? Because your immediate family has a lot to do with how you're even going to move forward with a potential entrepreneurship situations, everyone has to be on board. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have that support structure. If you just make the choice yourself, hey, I'm going to quit my job and do this entrepreneurship thing. If they're not on board with that, you're gonna when you those valleys of negativity or whatever hit, that's going to be three times as bad because they're like, hey, I told you, you know, and it's gonna it's much better if everyone's on board. So after
Mm-hmm.
some conversations with her and trying to figure out, she's like, yeah, well, you know, we'll give it a shot because I had already at that point had done a couple more things through 3R, and um, so it was kind of a slow thing. That's one of the things. So I talked about how I kind of spider off in different things. So one of the things that I've done a lot over the past couple of years is work with junior achievement. In addition to, so that I go to a lot of high schools and colleges talking about entrepreneurship and about game design, but I also just do that in general without necessarily being attached to junior achievement. And one of the things that I talk about specifically with entrepreneurship is that the great thing about it is that you don't have to just jump into it, right? You can just do it a couple hours a week to as like a start up as a hobby, quote unquote, and just sort of get your feet wet. And then as you start doing more things and getting things off the ground, then you can start taking more baby steps and maybe go down to part time with your job.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all right, I'm just going to take this giant leap of faith if it doesn't feel right to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a great that's one of the things that drew me to it also was it allowed me to because it's a lot of stuff you have to deal with, and there's it's scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of unknowns that I've described it recently as you're just dropped into a fog
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to walk into a direction,
Yeah.
and you might get lucky and you might come across you know, like this like thing, and as you move into a direction the fog starts to clear away a little more and a little
Mm-hmm.
more, but you might get unlucky, I should say, and all of a sudden there's a cliff in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
But the the one of the great things that you should do though is then just instead of taking that as a failure and to quit, be motivated enough to say, oh, this is a dead end, we're going to turn around and go this other way.
Mm-hmm.
So to just jump in 100% without doing anything entrepreneurial prior to that is a lot to ask of somebody. And
Yeah.
so to just say, hey, I'm gonna only work maybe 5 hours a week on something, um, and there are definitely conflicting arguments where you can say that's just not enough time to
Mm-hmm.
really make it worth anything. But I would say that especially in my industry where you're creating a product. So whether it's you're creating a book or you're creating a video game or you're creating whatever, you can take as much time initially for it to be made. You know, you're
Mm-hmm.
making an album. It can take you 5 years to make a music album.
Yeah.
It's that next one that you might have to take just a few months because now there's expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Well, I think that's a good point that
Mm-hmm.
you bring up, right? Like people will say that's the quote unquote wrong way to do it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think if there's something that I've learned having interacted with people on the show and in my own experience is very rarely is there one right way to do something. And so
Mm-hmm.
opening it up to say if it's right for you to work on something for 5 hours, that's great. But we've definitely also had other guests on the show where they did quit their job and
Mm-hmm.
just jumped into something and that was the right
Mhm,
thing for them. So to say
mhm.
there's multiple ways you can do it correctly and that you can learn from it
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. Especially if you don't necessarily have the financial support system to then keep the lights on, especially
Yeah.
if you have a family, it can be hard to ask someone to do that
Yeah.
and to
Mm-hmm.
then have that added pressure in itself because then it's not, I need to just make something. It's, I need to make something that sells now. And
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
that makes you make really bad decisions ultimately.
I was gonna
And
say it
so,
really, yeah, it brings up
yeah,
like not ethics, but it brings up a really interesting conversation of like quality versus sales and
yeah.
um I mean kind of business ethics of is this is this good for like the brand and what I stand for, or am I just taking like the money and running? You
Mm.
know?
Yeah. Hmm.
So
But I think also like one thing that we've talked about before and I wonder how you navigate this as someone who's really creative is having a product that's perfect between having a product
mm,
that's good enough to get it out there.
Yeah. And this ties back into the user experience thing that you were talking about too.
yeah.
So I really fell into the trap for the first, I would say, 3 years or so of 3R Interactive, where I was really hesitant to show people work until I felt like it was good enough, like it was perfect, right? And so I spent way much more time on stuff than it ever needed to be. And there's sort of like a loose sort of mathematical equation of the 80-20, right? Like you're going to spend what is it? You spend 80% of your time. I forget how it works, but basically that last 20% that you're working on, many of your users aren't even going to notice all this effort you're putting into it. Yeah, it's the last 20% that'll take up 80% of your time, whatever it is. So like people like that are creating the thing are going to notice all these little things that might seem off or wrong or that could be improved upon. But the majority of people that are your customers may not even ever notice it. They're like, oh, that was, I guess now that you pointed out, that's a problem, but I didn't even see it to begin with. And so one of the tenets of user experience is that user experience, and I guess in just the technology world now with the fast iteration concepts, which is you are not your ideal customer. You are not your customer, right? And that's a really hard thing, especially, and I still struggle with it, even though I try to implement it, which is make your initial prototype really fast and get it out in front of some customers and see what their feedback is. And then based on their feedback, you make the next version of it and get feedback, and then make the next version, and then you just build up that way. The benefits of that is that you know right away that you're making a product that people want, or you know right away that people don't care about this at all, and you haven't put in a bunch of time and resources into this product. Like I ran into the problem even just as early, like I guess technically that even happened last year to me, where I was working on a side project. It was a video game that I was kind of working on here and there whenever I had time. And then I was just like, I'm going to get this done. and I ended up making it a full-time effort, and no one cared about it. Like it was just like, it was something that I finished and I can say, hey, I finished this game and I published it. But if I would have spent the time, and if I would have just accepted the idea that, hey, people aren't really grasping onto this, right? Then I could have, and if I would have accepted that, then I could have made that continue to keep it. Maybe I'll work on it a couple of hours a month whenever I have time and just let it keep going, or just never finish it, as opposed to putting all this time and effort and pushing aside other things to get this done for it to never materialize in anything monetarily, right? And not to say that everything you do has to make money, but if you are trying to keep a business alive, ultimately money is a conversation that you have to deal with.
Sure.
And so, and if you run the numbers of like, if I were to work on something full time for a month, even if it's just straight 40 hours for 4 weeks, that could end up being a lot of money that's pumped into this project that could have gone somewhere else. So fast iterations is really important, and to make sure that you're not making decisions based on what you want, but what the data says that your customers want is the important part. Yeah.
What are, from your experience and maybe in interacting with other entrepreneurs, how do you see the data being used? Like, I feel like data is something that's so rarely talked about, like in entrepreneurship, and using numbers to support decisions, because as entrepreneurs, like I feel like this is sweeping generalization, but we're passionate about things, and we want, like, it often starts out as a passion project and stuff like that. But like I really think that you're the first guest we've had on the podcast who's brought up data. Can you speak to like how you use it, and kind of what metrics beyond sales, should folks be looking at? I don't know if you feel like you can speak to that, or.
Yeah, I think you can go off in a lot of different directions with data too. You can, so the data I was specifically talking about a minute ago was if you create a small little prototype, like for instance, I'm totally blanking on his name, but one of the co-founders of LinkedIn has a very popular saying, which is, if you're happy with version 1 of your product, then you spent too much time on it. So make something really fast. That, not saying that it's crap, but it functions to the basic level. Then you get that in front of some customers or potential customers and say, hey, what are your thoughts of this? Can you see where this is going? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And then take some of that feedback and build a little bit on it. Spend a few weeks on it. give it back, find new customers, see what they say about it. And taking that information, it makes valuable data, right? It's valuable data for you to know um, what direction you should be going, but more importantly, if you should even still be working on the project. That's a this idea of sunk cost, the sunk cost fallacy, is a big thing that I've been really focused on over the last year. So basically, since that game project I was talking about, and I kind of have a running theory. Again, I don't know how many tangents you want me to go on, but I'm going to talk about this a little bit. So my grandpa was a farmer, and he also retired from GM. So he did both things for a long time. And he has this theory. He didn't necessarily associate it with sunk cost fallacy, but he said you should always try something for 3 years, and then if it's still not working, then you can move to something else, but give it that chance, right? So I kind of took that idea a little bit for the sunk cost thing, which is give under the multiple of 3, whether it's 3 interactions with a potential customer, 3 milestones, 3 whatever it is, whatever number you want to put it out there. Say, I'm going to give myself this time to put as much effort into this thing as I possibly can. And if it's still not working, then I can feel comfortable letting it go, because that's one of the things people have, especially with, you say you get really passionate about projects, then it becomes really hard to let it go if it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And but if you put it under these parameters of, and I'm just using 3 because it works for me. You can make whatever, but I just think that you say, hey, I'm gonna plan out these 3 milestones, these 3 customer interactions, these 3 whatever, and if it's not working, then the whole project could fall away. Or I just know that that person isn't gonna be a customer of mine because they're not returning my emails or whatever. But there should be this concept that you're still putting a lot of effort into it, and then putting a wall, like I'm running as fast as I can, and then I hit that wall. And then based on all this information, I can then feel comfortable walking away saying I tried as hard as I could, but it's not working. Right. So let me try to circle that back around. So that's a big component of getting this data. So that's where but when it comes to like sales and stuff, now you already had the product out there and making money. Right. And that's a whole nother conversation of, are people buying the product? And if they're not, is it because it's priced too high, or is it because they just don't like it? And then that comes into other things of like trying to do marketing and trying to get customer feedback. And that is something that I can't speak as knowledgeably about because I'm still kind of experimenting with a lot of that myself. But it's there's people out there who can for sure give a lot of like formulas or whatever on the sales part of it. But yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. I don't know.
Totally.
Well, I think you really captured like the complexity of entrepreneurship and thinking about, this is my project, this is my passion, but how do I marry that up with business? How do I invite critique? How do I invite feedback into something that's like mine and be able to say, okay, this is what I'm hearing, so I can make those changes or I can let that go. And I think that can be a really hard journey for folks. So I really appreciate that your whole answer really brings up that there's so many things to think about. And this is one piece that you have to think about if you're going into business for yourself and creating things for other people. You're not your customer. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good.
None of this is easy, right?
No,
the being willing to let something go is not easy. Being able to take feedback constructively, and sometimes even if it's not presented in a constructive way, but being able to do that, being able to actually have it fail and then be okay with that. All this stuff is really, really hard to do, and it could sound easy with someone like me being like, yeah, you should just be comfortable with failure and fail as fast as possible, which are mantras that I have, but it's stuff that I have to work on. Right. And I have to keep telling myself it's okay to if I worked really hard on something and it didn't go anywhere. It's just that the important factor is that I was able to move forward, because really that's really one of the major measurements of any success is when you come across an obstacle, are you able to push forward through it? Any of these companies that are still alive that are 20, 30 years old or more, they just didn't give up, right? They just tried a new thing and just kept going. So that's it's not easy at all. It's just something you have to just keep pushing through.
Yeah. When you talk about failing and being comfortable with failure and even failing fast, like I'm really
Mm-hmm.
interested around that concept. What are some things that you kind of look for in order to be like fast failure, we're done? So you don't
Mm-hmm.
get so caught up into everything.
Well, if you let's say you're working on a mobile application that let me come up with an example. So a mobile application that allows people to find, I don't know, a local dog park or something, right? I'm just random examples.
Yeah.
So you would come up with whatever your basic functionality is. So if you whatever basic things that you want this app to do, you would just plug it in. You spend as much time, like I don't know, I'm just gonna throw out some numbers, but basic numbers of like you're gonna spend a month or two to work on getting the basic functionality working. It's not gonna look pretty. You're not gonna focus at all on graphics. It's just does the functionality work.
Mm-hmm.
And then you only focus on like the main ones. Maybe even you have. I'll just use three again. The three kind of major functionalities, like A, I can find a dog part. B, I can like write a review on it, and C, whatever, right? But then all the other things maybe are part of your plan, but they're not implemented yet.
Mm-hmm.
So then you show that to some people that have dogs, or find what your ideal demographic would be, and if they're like, I don't think I'm going to use this, and you get, you talk to 20 people and 18 of them say, I don't think I'm going to use this. It's probably a good idea that this is not, it's probably a good indicator that you probably shouldn't spend much more time on this. Right. Um, and you could argue that, hey, there's two people who say they would use it and they might spend money on it. Yeah. But would those two people spend enough money on it to justify your cost of building it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably a good example of, and it's a hard decision still too, of saying we're just not getting the right kind of feedback. Is it because, and that's why I say the major functionality needs to be in there, because you could then convince yourself that, oh, we're just showing it to them without having this core functionality that we think is super awesome. So let's spend some time building that, where you should be building that first, and all the little fluff stuff should come afterward. Because if they really like the main thing, the core thing, then you're onto something, and then you can start making additions in um, there's a word I'm blanking on it, but iterating in versions. There we go. So yeah.
I like that.
I like it too.
Yeah. Has me thinking about a handful of things.
Well, it's thought-provoking, right?
Yeah. It's a concept that I think we've all heard, but in a way that I don't think I've heard before, which is I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and that is still part of the part that's not easy, right? It's to take, especially if you work a month on something that you think is awesome, and 20, 50 people say that, I don't really care about it. That could be really hard, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to hear.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those that you just have to go into it with as thick a skin as you can possibly have it, and say, I'm just here to listen. And one of the core things too about the feedback part is that you should just hand it to them and just watch, and not try to direct at all, because that's one of the user experience things, is that if you have to direct them on how to use this app or use this game or use whatever, then what are the likelihoods that they're actually going to go and seek out that help later? Are they going to go online just to find out how to do a simple thing, a thing that should be simple within your product?
Yeah.
Then what they're going to do is just write a bad review, and then that's just going to make it harder for you to sell future stuff, right? So that's one of the key factors of having people look at it and test it, is to try to just reserve you just got to do this thing, right? Is to let them, and to see how long it takes for people to figure things out, and to try to simplify that as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the user experience part.
On that note, like when it comes to getting feedback from folks and everything, when you've made a product that is so connected with some part of like your personality or who you are, and you're getting the user feedback, how are you able to kind of separate they're talking about the product versus this is feedback like of myself, and not taking it personally? Like how have you kind of managed to navigate like that separation?
That's part of it sounds easy to do, but it's not. It's because especially as a creative, you're designing something that you feel is like, it's like, this is my thing. I want to make this thing because it's just important to me. But if you go at it with the idea of like, I have this interesting idea that I think is important because I think it's interesting. Um, but I'm going to go in small chunks, right? I'm going to have this core thing that it does and show people and try to get as much feedback as possible, then build off of it. Because if you go at it more collaboratively like that, if you can look at it as this is a collaborative thing, it's not just my idea, my way, then it's the thing. It's a little bit easier for you to not have that grasp on it, because that makes it even harder. If you're just like, this is the thing I want, the likelihood of you having to stop that project or to kill it is really low, right? And then you'll do what I did, which is spend 6 straight months working on something that no one cared about or purchased. And some people, and that's fine, especially if that's just the thing you're doing as like a side project, great. Like it took you a few months to do because you're only working on it a few hours a month. Awesome. It just turned out that no one liked it. It's just part of the process. But if you're relying on the products you're working on full time, like I made that a full-time thing, and then no one purchased it, right? Or not enough people purchased it to justify the, 120 hours or whatever plus you put into it, then how do you pay your bills, right? And how do you, so it's like you have to, as much as you can, you have to look at it as this isn't just my thing. And that can be, that's hard to even do in general because you are still making general decisions, right? You're the one saying, even though we're making this big thing, it's kind of on you as the person who's most likely, who owns the company, is most likely the main producer of what you're working on. You're making all the small decisions. And so you feel a lot of ownership over it. Like an example today, I was just talking with some people and they were talking about the process of big companies like Disney and Pixar and how, like, one of the things that they do really well is that they could be working on a big movie for 2 years into it and then realize, hey, we need to rewrite this whole movie and scrap everything and start over. Like, to be able to do that takes a lot of like a lot of constitution to say this is all this effort and work we've already put into it, but we got to redo it completely, right? So that is sort of what I strive to be, is to where you can look at this big thing, all this time and all this effort, and it's sacrifice in a lot of ways, and you have to change it or just stop working on it completely is really, really hard. And there's no simple way to navigate it other than practice, really. It's just, it's sort of like saying being comfortable with failure. You can't just say, I'm going to be comfortable if this doesn't work. And then it's like, you just have to like internalize it and take it and just walk through it. It's like all those obstacle things I referred to before. It's like, you have to just take all the stuff as it comes and just push forward and learn as much as you can from it. So that way you can minimize any potential failures in the future.
I hope you have a really good support system to help you through that piece.
Oh yeah, totally. That's a huge component of everything. And that was one of the things that I think is important too. Not necessarily a support system. Not that you have to fully rely on it, like your partner or your family, immediate family, for all that support. But seek out community support, seek out other entrepreneurs, seek out other artists, other game developers, other whatever business you're in. Seek out other people to just, even if it's just you're meeting once a month on some Skype thing or something, but to be able to see, because oftentimes you're just as an entrepreneur, you're just sitting by yourself working on stuff. And it can all of the things that all the problems that you're coming across can feel like so massive that you're just like, I'm the only one dealing with these things, right? But if you can go out and find other people in the similar industry, or even if it's not similar but are also entrepreneurs, it's just, to be able to like, oh, other people are dealing with the same things I'm dealing, and maybe even have suggestions for you similar to like this podcast, right? That you can, it makes that's the support structure that you need. And it's it can be energizing in a lot of ways to just talk with other people who are doing similar things. So.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I wasn't expecting to find when we started the podcast, but I have learned, is that like the entrepreneur story, it's very different and it's very similar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's amazing how when you get a couple of us together, we may live in completely different worlds, but we can all like have the same conversation, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
And I know you're really active in like in-person events and everything, like that was how we met.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like community is really, really essential. One question that I did have was we've talked about failing and failing fast and everything. I
Hmm.
want to flip the script and ask how do you find wins like in those losses and find the gems to continue to move forward, even if it's not like one project, but to not throw in the towel of 3R and you know.
Yeah. Well, that's great because that's something I've even pondered, especially dealing with the or getting into the sunk cost fallacy thing that I
Mhm.
talked about. Like I've even tried to apply that to the 3R as a whole. Like
Mhm.
when what is my marker to say I just need to stop even with this company, whether that's
Mm.
not necessarily being and stopping being an entrepreneur in general, but maybe the current path I'm on isn't right.
Mhm.
It's a really hard thing to figure out and to ask yourself. And you already alluded to it. Like every no entrepreneur is the same. Like there's the saying that if you've met one entrepreneur, you just met one entrepreneur. It's not like you
Mhm.
can meet that one person and then make general statements about everybody,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? So my story might be a lot different than most people because I'm someone who just works on a lot of different things. You know,
Mhm.
I've been published by a traditional publisher, and I've
Mhm.
self-published books, done mobile applications and audiobooks. Like I've just tried all this stuff.
Mhm.
So I can find wins in small things by just saying, "Hey, I finished." Like even just saying I finished something and put it out there
Mhm.
is a win in a lot of ways, even if
Mhm.
it didn't even make any money, right?
Right.
Um, to say that I wrote this book and just put it out on Amazon as a self publish can be a win for a lot of people, right? Because that can be a lot big challenge for that to start working on a podcast, to do whatever, do small things like that. You can find wins that keep you energized, and especially if you're
Mhm.
working with like mastermind groups or working with groups that are just part of your community, you can use that as a way to keep motivated, and the people around will help you like see like because that's one thing that I was part of that imposter syndrome thing that I talked
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
is that or that you brought up but I concurred with is
Mhm.
that just saying that hey I finished something and published it is can be a lot different than a lot of other people.
Mhm.
You know, there's the concept that ideas are pretty meaningless. It's the execution that's the important part. So
Mm.
if you can say, hey, I had this idea, but I also took the time to work on something, to edit it, to whatever, and to release it, whatever it
Mhm.
is, that's a big win in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
So I don't know if this is answering your question really, but I think that you can just find small, and even if, okay, so let's say you put out something that no one likes in terms of like the fast iteration,
Mhm.
you work on something for a few months, you put it out there, there'll still be good things about it. There's things that you
Mhm.
can take about that particular project that you can move on to another project.
Mhm.
Like one of the things that we do in the technology world, I don't know if it happens in other industries, but we have what's called a post-mortem. And so
Mhm.
at the end of every project, you write up this thing that says what went good about the project, what went bad about the
Mhm.
project, or within the development of the project, and then what can we learn for the future, right? Those are
Mhm.
three things that you write down
Yeah.
everything about so that you always have this thing to look back on. Because what ends up happening is the project that I worked on in 2012, I'm not going to remember all the good and bad things. I'm just going to remember certain things, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to still be able to keep those lessons somewhere where you can find them.
Mhm.
And so you can, if you look at it that way, where even if you made something that no one liked from a prototype perspective,
Mhm.
there's small things about it, whether it's the way that you did your design process, the way that you designed your menu, or some, there's things like that that you can come up with that you can say, hey, this is a great, this small thing out of this whole thing was a great idea that I can move forward to another project. It's just not good enough for this one.
Mm.
Um, and it's just part of the thing that sounds easy to do but isn't,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah.
to try to find the silver linings in
Yeah.
things.
Well, and it sounds
um
like it sounds like if you make something or like make way with something or with a project, then that action is really the win.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, so many people have these really great ideas, and I've been guilty of it too, where I've had like really solid ideas, but I haven't done anything with it. So, like, ideas are cool and all, but it's only when you take that action that you can even
Mm-hmm.
start to like have that win. I have a bit of a writing background, and what I had one teacher that was like, I don't care what you do, but just write, like, write on paper every day, because then when you die, you've left something. Like the action of putting pen to paper, that means you've left something behind versus just being taken out of the world and having nothing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
I mean, also something that
totally.
that you said that I think really did answer the question is
Mm-hmm.
being really, really thoughtful about how you define success as an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur. If it's if your definition of success is making $1 million and
Mm-hmm.
you have made $1 million, how do you find the wherewithal to keep going?
Mm-hmm.
But if you can find success in, like, I put something out there and
Mm-hmm.
yes, they didn't like it, but these are the things and the lessons that I've learned and the things that I can bring forward. If that can be your definition of success, then
Mm-hmm.
that's much more grounding and empowering and kind of gives you that energy to move forward. I mean, that's what I heard in what you were
Mm-hmm.
saying,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one key thing that I'm just a person who has a lot of these sayings now because I've talked to a lot of people about entrepreneurship, but especially if you're for people who might be listening to this who are interested in starting something but haven't yet,
Mm-hmm.
the biggest piece of information that's part of the fail faster mentality, which is just start doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I say this, what I'm about to say may sound really strange, but there's there's truth behind it, which is the first thing you make is always going to suck,
Mm-hmm.
right? So don't worry that, like, don't keep working on it until you think it's awesome, because the goal is to put something out there and then get the feedback. You
Mm-hmm.
could, if you worked on something for 5 years, you're probably still going to get the same feedback as if you just worked on it for 2 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just get a core thing out there and get people to look at it and give you honest. That's a big thing. Honest, constructive feedback,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and be comfortable with the fact that the feedback is probably going to be something on the lines of, you really need to keep working because this isn't super great. But that's just how it is. Like, everything comes with practice. The first time you write a book isn't that's not going to be great. First time you
Mm-hmm.
make a mobile application, like, if you compare the first, like, if you look at like college, for example, the first project you work on in college compared to the last thing you work on, the last thing is always the better thing because you're building onto it, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So to just be okay with knowing that the first thing you're going to work on isn't going to be super great, and just get the feedback, just seek out information as much as you can, and to try to just be in that mentality, then you're on a really strong path for success.
Nice.
And
Realistic
don't hold on to it
expectations.
and be worried about what people might think of it.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. It's a really, really great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, One other question that I do have is, you've been in the entrepreneur game for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say has been the most unexpected thing that you've learned about entrepreneurship?
Oh, that's a good question. Most unexpected thing. Okay, I would say it ties in a little bit with what I was saying about doing things even if you don't feel qualified yet, which
Mm.
is, um, just few years ago, Chris Ivy, who's a part of Tech Connect, something like TechStars, yeah, he said, which
Mm.
is an incubator program for entrepreneurships. He kind of came to Fort Wayne and was giving like an assessment of the entrepreneurship community.
Mm.
And one of the questions someone had was, "Hey, I'm only 3 months into my company. I'm a brand new entrepreneur, but I want to be a part of helping build this thing. How do I do that?" And he said, which I thought was the most unexpected but great advice, which was, even if you're 2 days into being an entrepreneur, you still have things that are worth saying to someone who's starting today, right?
Mm.
Mm.
So be willing to go off and help people as much as possible, even if you don't feel necessarily like, oh, I haven't been, for example, like, I haven't made that $1 million mark,
Mhm.
but should people listen to what I'm about to say? If you can put it out, if you just are willing to help people out or give feedback or whatever, um, even if you're just starting off, there's things that you had learned that the person that's 2 days behind you hasn't learned yet. And so to be comfortable enough to put out your advice in a constructive way was a big deal for me anyway. It's like, I felt a little awkward, especially starting to go meet at some of the local meetups for things. I was like, why is just like, I'm just sort of this person. I feel awkward because I haven't done anything yet. And there's all these people who have had companies for 5 or 10 years. And there's a person who sold his company and is doing well. Like there's stuff like that I just like, should I even be in this room? Right. And to just know that everyone's on the same journey and everyone's looking for some the community. And so to be okay with being like, to kind of walk in the same shoes and be around other people who you might feel are farther along in the processes than you, but be willing to speak up when questions are asked, I think is a big one that it took me a while to learn, because I felt really uncomfortable for the first probably year, I think, of going to some of these little meetups and stuff, because I was just like, I haven't done anything yet. You know, I'm just, I'm not qualified enough to answer any of these questions, but you are. So your input, just because of the path that you're going on, is much different than even that person who sold their company went on a totally different journey than you are. And so they might not even encounter the same problems that you have. Right. So it's, that's a rambling answer because I wasn't expecting the question, but I think it, hopefully that was somewhat coherent.
No, I think that was
I
great.
liked it. It was great. Yeah.
All right. Well, Tammy, do you have any final questions?
No, you stole my question. You always steal my question.
Sorry. Jay, where can folks find you on the interwebs?
Sure. I'm one of these people that am horrible at social media. But 3R, so www.3rinteractive.com is my company website. I have a personal website, jjohns.com. And I am on like Facebook. 3R Interactive is on Facebook and stuff like that. And like I have all those accounts, but I don't really ever use them. So you can try to reach out to me on those. But I just need to get a lot better at doing that. So I would say that definitely my 3R's website or my personal website, and just email me at j@3rinteractive.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me. And I'm totally willing to talk with anyone anytime about entrepreneurship, particularly game design related stuff, but just in general. You know, side note, I talked about how I talk to a lot of schools and stuff about entrepreneurship and game design, two separate topics. But every time I hand out my business card and say, email me, and I'm totally willing to sit down and talk with you one-on-one or whatever, no one ever has. So, and I've been doing this for like 2 years, you know, every semester, multiple schools. So definitely reach out to me if you want to just talk about entrepreneurship or whatever. And I'm totally down to help you out, even if it's just having a cup of coffee. So, yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. If you guys like what we're doing, please subscribe, leave a rating, share it with your friends. It would mean the world to us. If you're not a huge fan of what we're doing, maybe share it with someone you think may like it. If you want to keep up to date on all of the Sugar and Spikes shenanigans, get the behind-the-scenes tour of life and business as a millennial female entrepreneur, then follow me across all the social medias. I'm Dez W, Ms. MBA, DEZWMS across all the platforms, your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagrams. I'm there, same name. And don't forget, if you're ready to rise up as a legendary leader, you know you are, then head on over to DesireeW.com and sign up for the free 5-day Legendary Leadership Challenge. Also, I want to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. And guys, remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.